If you're one of these horrible, awful, warped individuals who doesn't think the Holocaust happened, and you see an AI-created image telling a fake Holocaust story, you can then claim this story is made up, which is then muddying the waters of what's real and what's not real. Because they're saying, oh, well, if it really happened, why would they be needing to fake an image of it? They're buying into this bullshit of Churchill being the villain of World War II. He's not a villain. By any stretch of the imagination, he's not a villain. There's just slop coming in. And what they're doing is these people are playing on our emotions. They're using little bits of emotionally wrought stuff. They're using the Holocaust. They're using veterans returning to battlefields. And they're creating these stories that are basically a little bit similar to something that's real. There's been an establishment as there's a difference between the evil Germans and the good Germans. And this is when people like Rommel, who didn't survive the war because of being implicated in the assassination attempt on Hitler, has been labeled a good German. And then the idea of Choltitz saving Paris, he goes into that category of the good German because he's not the horrible German. But the truth, of course, is there's a big area in between those two extremes. Isn't how foreshadowed correctly, unfortunately, an era where Holocaust denial will be rife.
The Nazis did occupy British soil, the Channel Islands, for almost the entire war. What actually happened to those people? How were they treated? And how much freedom did they have? And were there any concentration camps on the Channel Islands?
Well, it varies from island to island. Depending on the size of the population. So Jersey and Guernsey had a similar occupation. Alderney, which was the smaller one, was somewhat different because all the locals left. Well, like one farmer or something stayed on who didn't want to go or something. And Alderney, because there were no locals left apart from this one family, was where they did have a concentration camp of sorts, but you get into the issue of language and what is meant by concentration camp, what is meant by work camp, and every Holocaust historian will give you a slightly different version of the interpretation of that language. And Alderney, we can get to that in a second, I'll go back to Alderney, but Jersey and Guernsey both, the most of the population stayed there. Jersey and Guernsey did have a certain number of people who were deported. Obviously, people who had a Jewish background tried to get out, and a lot did get out. The Germans would move away certain people who were perceived to be a threat. So people who had, shown sort of resistance instincts, that kind of thing, were moved out. Political prisoners, that kind of thing. But to some extent, Jersey and Guernsey carry the Sark as well, which is I'm less familiar with, but similar, sort of halfway between in terms of what there was some evacuation, some locals stayed behind. But Alderney is the one people talk about because of this camp that was there. So going back to that, it's been quite controversial for the last 2 or 3 years because to the point where there was an inquiry. There was an official inquiry called the something or other inquiry about 2 years ago, where all sorts of historians got involved in it as to try and determine how many of these prisoners died on Alderney and were buried on Alderney. And at the low end, it's a couple of hundred, and then several hundred. And then at the high end, there are some people suggesting it's several thousand.
Wow.
So it gets rather complicated. I forget what figure the official inquiry came back and said, and I don't want anyone to kind of, say, oh, you got it wrong. I feel it was a few hundred, but this debate is still kind of going on. And as I said, it comes down to the definitions of the difference between labor camp, death camp, extermination camps, etc., and in that, obviously, the Nazis had camps that were primarily designed just to exterminate people as soon as they arrived there. Then at the other end, they have camps where they are housing workers who are doing stuff for the war effort, who they don't particularly care about, but at the same time, they don't really want them all to die because they then lose their workforce. And Alderney comes into that sort of category more than it does an extermination camp. But as the war went on and all the Channel Islands had in a sense, more difficulty getting food and things like that, then the conditions that these prisoners were in got worse. And so more people are dying in them. But the irony of the Channel Islands in terms of Hitler's policy is that, as with a lot of things Hitler gets obsessed about, it becomes beyond strategy. It becomes about it being an obsession point for him. And we can't second guess Hitler's mental state and exactly what he was thinking, but he was very, very pleased that he had this one part of Britain. And technically it is and it isn't part of Britain. The people who are watching this from the Channel Islands go, well, we kind of are. You know, they recognize the royal family, but they have their separate, you know, governments and what have you. It is very complicated, but they are nevertheless English speaking. They're recognized as being part of the overarching kind of British influenced, if not directly governed. So Hitler puts this massive, great amount of concrete and defenses into the Channel Islands. You know, it's something like 1/8 of all the concrete used on the entire Atlantic Wall from Norway down to the border with Spain got used in the Channel Islands. But is, as so often was the case with Hitler, his mania, his obsessions ended up making everything he did there pointless, in the sense that he put so much concrete and defenses there. Even if the Allies had wanted to actually attack and bring an amphibious force in and try and retake the islands in a offensive operation, which they definitely were considering, they definitely thought about that as an option, sort of early to midpoint of the war. They put so many guns there that the British just they couldn't do it. There was the loss of life, the difficulty of it. So the Allies bypass it effectively.
Yeah.
So it all comes for nothing, and then famously the Channel Islands aren't liberated till after VE Day, because it takes a while for everybody to get there and go there again. I think the people of Alderney, and I'll forget which date it is in December, I think it's December, they don't return to the island until December 45. And that's the day they still commemorate each year, is their return. And they'd been gone, whatever it was, 5 years. So, yeah, I mean, there's a weird, one of the places I was there springtime last year, and there was one particular part of the coast. I think this was it doesn't really matter whether it was Guernsey or Alderney. I did both of those islands there. When I'm driving past one bit of beach that was impossible to land on because it was too rocky. That's me looking at it as a D-Day guy. I'm looking at it going, is that a possible one for landing? And this one clearly wasn't a possible one for landing. And yet there were these two Widerstandsnetz, German defensive positions, each end of this, and the beach was only about 1.5 miles long or something. And I think one end had 2 Widerstandsnetz. There's 3 German defensive positions protecting this one beach that is physically impossible to land on anyway. But all of the guns in these concrete emplacements were of a larger caliber than any of the guns behind the actual 5 landing beaches in Normandy that the Allies did land on, which kind of blows your mind. I think the guns there were 105 millimeter. Now, people will say, watching this, though, well, there were larger guns than that in Normandy. Yes, gun batteries, like Long-sur-Mer, like Pointe du Hoc, they had 6-inch guns or 155 millimeter. But the Widerstandsnetz, in Normandy, every 0.5 mile sets of German defenses, there's nothing bigger than an 88 millimeter, 50 millimeter, that kind of thing. But into Channel Islands, on a beach that, as I said, I'm reinforcing my own statement, the beach which is impossible to land on, there are 3 guns defending it. And that's just one bit of beach. You drive around it, it's just more concrete than you can imagine seeing, just everywhere. Crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. Is that the fact that it is British? Is that the only reason, or did the Nazis and Hitler genuinely think that they would invade that first before going for the rest of France or Belgium or Netherlands before D-Day?
If the Germans truly thought that going via the Channel Islands was a viable way of getting to Berlin quicker, then they must have been smoking something very potent, because at whatever point it's done, it's not part of a journey towards, but it's going to have to be a peripheral, additional, extra type invasion, because you've to stage a landing there and then go from there to France. Is that what you do? You do like a double amphibious landing. So it has to only be to do with Hitler's hubris, from my point of view.
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of Alderney, you mentioned the camp on there. Where did the people come from that were sent to the camp if basically everyone left that island? Was it from Jersey and Guernsey, or was it from other parts?
No, it was from across Europe. There were Russians, I think there were Poles, there were Hungarians. I think the museum there says something like there were people there from 16 different nations, something like that. So it's their kind of usual collected resource of undesirables and people that they didn't give a shit about across Europe, who were kind of being moved around to wherever they were needed that time. And obviously putting in that amount of concrete into those places required a huge amount of physical labor, because I went to Alderney, as I said, last year, and it's kind of getting off the boat. There is an airfield there, an airport there, but it's kind of like the beginning of like an Indiana Jones film, because you sort of have to get off a little boat and climb up a wet ladder into the harbor, and you sort of throw your suitcase up and someone there catches it. I mean, I'm not joking. It's fantastic there, Alderney. Guernsey has a proper port in it, but Alderney, it is what it is. So getting materials there was difficult. I mean, they were, to some extent, they were dragging stuff they were crushing rock and things like that on the Channel Islands to try and limit how much they brought in. But not only was it a stupid idea to put the concrete in there in the first place, because it just persuaded the Allies not to go at all, is that the effort of getting stuff there was huge. And they were still building stuff. They were still attempting to build bunkers there in June 1944, after the landings had actually occurred in Normandy. So, well, what do you think's happening now? I mean, so the Channel Islands, with all due respect to the people who lost their lives there, and of course there were people shot by the Germans there, and there were these workers who died there. In terms of it sitting into World War II, it's kind of bonkers. A lot of it doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't make any sense why the Germans made the effort there. But good, because all the resources the Germans put in there effectively were for nothing. They had no purpose, except to mean there was less concrete to go elsewhere. That's the key thing, is every bit of concrete put somewhere where the Allies didn't land was less concrete that was put in where they did land.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned a lot of the people who were showing signs of resistance were removed from the islands. But in terms of Guernsey and Jersey, the most populated islands, what was life like for the people who weren't able to escape? Have you spoken to any people?
Well, I've spoken to people who knew people. So it's this strange kind of paradoxical situation in that, to some extent, life just carried on, except in addition to being the Jersey or Guernsey police, there would be German military police and German soldiers there. There were German soldiers garrisoned in, because it's a very large garrison, again, because there's so much concrete put there's a large German garrison there. So those famous photos you can find of what looks like a typical British bobby, a constable, conversing with a German military policeman. And then there's a member of the Guernsey population asking the policeman, is the road closed today to wherever it would be? So, like in Britain, there was rationing, there were shortages, etc., etc. The resistance there, by definition, had to be more along the lines of defiance rather than going out and like blowing up railway lines, because A, there aren't railway lines, and B, how the hell are you going to get explosives, all the stuff you need? So the resistance there was more about, for example, if an Allied flyer was shot down and came ashore in Guernsey or Jersey, that they were try to be housed, looked after by the locals will try and look after them, try and get a message out to someone so the British could come in with the SOE or something and get the pilot out or rescue that kind of thing. So it's more about assisting any allies who are in the area, providing intelligence, of course, because there were a couple of commando raids that happened sort of midpoint of the war that the local people provided information for. But it's not what you'd call a traditional resistance. Because they don't have the resources and there's nowhere to hide. There's you can't run off into the wilderness. There is no wilderness in the Channel Islands. They're so small. So I'm not dismissing their efforts. I'm saying that what they did above and beyond what they were able to do given the circumstances. What I found personally very interesting is, for me, the big difference is that they're okay. They could illegally listen to the BBC. I mean, you obviously, unlike any occupied countries, you had to declare your radio sets, all that kind of stuff there. And if you had a civilian radio set that could pick up the BBC, you had to officially hand it in to the Germans. Obviously, people kept them. Some people kept them, and you could listen to the BBC. But if you don't, and even if you could listen to the BBC, you'd only dare listen to it for a few minutes a day. The most of the information the islanders are getting about the war is German-produced propaganda, but of course in English. When I was in Guernsey, we went to the library, the Prio library there, which is sort of right in the biggest part of the population there. And as a D-Day guy, I was looking at the way the Channel Islanders were hearing about D-Day in Normandy the day after. So the German press. Now, if you're in London or Edinburgh, you're hearing, okay, you're not getting much information about the invasion because a lot of it's still secret. But what you're getting is real. It's an invasion has taken place in northwest France. The Allies are pushing ahead despite some losses. It is a victory, etc., etc., etc. June the 7th in Guernsey, you're being told that the landings have barely got a foothold, that the German army is rushing and is destroying the Allies on the beach. I'm reading that, and it's weirdly, if I don't read German, but if I saw a German language newspaper explaining that same thing, it would sort of make sense to me because, of course, they're being given propaganda, but reading it in English, because my default setting is that English written contemporary information is correct because it's English language. But this is German-controlled propaganda. So we're reading it going, but that's not what was happening in Normandy. The beachhead was successful, but if you read the German reports, it's been a disaster. I can't remember exactly what it was saying, but it's like swarms of German squadrons are now, destroying these people there, and it's only a matter of time before they limp back to the survivors limp back and try and swim back to England. And I think a lot of the Channel Islanders realized, because they'd had 4 years of this, that this probably was a load of old crap. But at the same time, you don't know for certain. Yeah. So for me, that was my biggest takeaway is that life was very similar broadly to it sits somewhere between what life would be like in the rest of the UK, in that there's rationing, but you're under occupation. Similar as well to what the occupation would be like in France or Belgium or Netherlands, that kind of place. So like somewhere between the two, somewhere between life going on as normal, and yet you absolutely know who's in charge. And the other thing is the Germans who were stationed were there. By definition, the Channel Islands are kind of isolated. They're very community based. There's probably a little bit more of a daily begrudging acceptance of each other there than perhaps there is in France or the Netherlands, because the Germans were a long way from home as well. I mean, if you're a 17-year-old, 18-year-old German infantryman, a couple of nights off a month in Guernsey, probably not really going to fulfill your young man needs, where, a couple of days in Paris or Rotterdam or something like that. So I think they end up forming a bit more of a bond with the locals, even though there is this master and sort of servant thing going on. So it's basically it's similar to the UK, similar to France, but very separate. And I think the Channel Islanders I know are kind of fiercely keen on making sure their story of World War II is told from their point of view, and the Guernsey people would identify their experience as being slightly different to Jersey and slightly different to Alderney, because they have this sort of like, I don't know how you describe it, like London football teams rivalry with each other. You know, they're kind of neighbours, but there's some, you know, jokes back and forth. So it's an extraordinary situation. I think one of the things is that if you're from the Channel Islands, of course you know about it, because I talk about being in Normandy. You couldn't possibly not be aware of World War II if you live in Normandy, because you're driving past cemeteries and memorials all the time. Well, in Guernsey and Alderney, Jersey, you're driving past German concrete, you know, every minute, because 99% of it is still there. It's so bloody hard to remove because you've got tons and tons of concrete. And what's interesting or weirdly interesting is when I am in Normandy, the Germans just basically, here's a flat bit of dunes, or an undisturbed bit of dunes. Let's slap some concrete in. In Guernsey or Alderney, they're slapping it into the previous stuff, which is built into the previous stuff, which is built into the previous stuff. So there's one particular place, I think it was Alderney, where you can see a little bit of Roman herringbone kind of patterned flooring. And then there's the era when the British Empire, I guess, were defending it against the French. So going into the 18th, 19th centuries, that period. Then kind of the early 20th century, when there's sort of that protection, not so much against the enemy, but kind of port protection, harbor walls, flood protection kind of stuff, wave protection. And then there's a German stuff on top. So it's like those sort of slices of archaeology you see in a museum where it goes through the layers, you know, like your Jurassic. So, that's extraordinary. I mean, in one particular place, they have a replica German field gun that is wheeled out of a floor, and I think the floor is Roman or something, or at least has Roman kind of echoes, and the gun would be wheeled out through a Victorian era arch up against a 19th century British wall behind a German bit of concrete on top of it to neaten it all off, and so that this gun slides out past all these eras of history. So really, really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, sounds incredible. And you mentioned how maybe there was still master and servant, but it may be more civil in a way. I was curious to know whether there were any marriages or children between the native populations and the Nazis that you've heard of or read about.
I'm sure there must have been, but I don't know. I don't have any particular stories at my fingertips to talk about. I mean, I can speak from the Normandy point of view that there are. I know at least a handful of examples of, children who were born during the occupation, but after war they kind of lopped a year off and said they were born as a result of a dalliance with an American soldier in June 44. And you meet this kid's too old to have been born in, you know, if you had a dalliance with an American soldier in June 44, so we're talking 9 months, the child would be born in, you know, March, April 1945. So, but there are kids who are already like a year old in March 45 who are being taken in and say, oh no, the kid's just big for his. So there was sort of a way of kind of covering it up a little bit. And people and the authorities kind of just turning a blind eye to it because of the stigma of being born. You know, and let's be honest, there's a whole different array of ways in which a child could be born during an occupation, from a loving, tender relationship between two young people at one end to well, let's not beat about the bush, to rape at the other end. So and I'm assuming there are similar examples of things like that within the Channel Islands, but I don't know of any particular cases.
Yeah. And you said in our last episode that you were currently writing a book where von Choltitz was a character, in that he was the man who refused Hitler's orders to blow up Paris. Most people remember him as a hero who saved the city. You suggested last time that history has been a bit too kind for him. What's the real story?
Well, yes. I mean, there was an era in the 1950s when the Cold War is hotting up. Pardon the mixed use of it, but where there was a need to reassure NATO that Germany, who are an ally of the UK, the USA, Canada, etc., are part of this and fully committed. And a lot of German military figures in the 50s would have been connected to the war in some way, because, of course, there were war crimes of the real awful perpetrators. But you cannot slap everybody who served in the German military just in prison for collective. Whether they should have been is another question, but obviously they weren't. And so out of this, you have this idea that because there were German officers in NATO, and what the Choltitz was, but the point is that there's been an establishment as there's a difference between the shitty Germans, the evil Germans, and the good Germans. And this is when people like Rommel, who didn't survive the war because of being implicated in the assassination attempt on Hitler, has been labeled a good German. And then the idea of Choltitz saving Paris, he goes into that category of the good German because he's not the horrible German. But the truth, of course, is there's a big area in between those two extremes. And all of these general officers, he's very much part of the regime. He very much knows what's going on. He knows how labor is brought to places. He would have, you're talking about, 1,200 sites within the greater Third Reich where workers are being abused and murdered and stuff like that. And if you're a general officer, you are aware of this. So Choltitz is part of a regime that he bloody well knows what's going on behind the scenes. And yes, if you frame it in a certain way, he does sort of decide to not send out his demolition teams to destroy. I mean, they had the wiring in place around things like the Eiffel Tower and Notre Dame and what have you in August 44 to destroy these places. And he did at the end sort of make sure that didn't actually happen. But a lot of it is self-serving. A lot of it is trying to save his own ass and make sure he gets out of it okay. And the realization that his headquarters are going to be overrun, that he could end up being captured by the Allies, etc., etc., etc. And if he can play in an interrogation, but I didn't detonate the charges to blow up Paris, it all looks good on his report card. So there's doing things because you genuinely care, and there's doing things because you're doing to be seen to do the right things. And I'm afraid, from my point of view, he very much comes into that category there. And he's fighting, when he's in command of the army that I'm writing about, the German army in Normandy, he's fighting tooth and nail for every inch of Normandy. He doesn't give a shit if his artillery shells fall on French civilians there. He doesn't give a shit if the battles there are causing civilian deaths, or he's fighting as. And I'm not saying he's wrong for doing that. He's a soldier. That is his job. But to kind of paint him as being some, I don't know how you'd call it, like good Samaritan type figure who is the same could equally be applied to von Stauffenberg, who leads the assassination attempt, who was played by Tom Cruise, among other actors in various film portrayals over the year in Valkyrie, who there are statues of in Germany because of his stance about wanting to kill Hitler. And so he's a good guy in that sense. But if you dig into what it was he and his comrades were wanting, it wasn't like they were gonna, if they'd successfully assassinated Hitler and they had got their own army in place, they weren't going to get on the telephone within 5 minutes, calling up, Googling Eisenhower's headquarters and saying, hello, can we surrender, please? We don't want to play war anymore. The war would have dragged on in a very different way. I don't know that von Stauffenberg would have done anything particular to stop the murdering of trains of people to the concentration camps. He's just a guy who had seen that Hitler was now the wrong person to lead Germany out of this. But his path of leading Germany out of the mess it was in wasn't some Robin Hood, again, good Samaritan idea of laying down arms, stopping all the death. It was a maybe a less shitty regime, but not dramatically less shitty, if that makes sense. But there was a need in Germany post-war, which I completely understand, to find some sort of heroes to bring out of it for their own sanity, for their own reasons to rebuild their country. They needed to have some people they could say, these are the ones who were, trying to do something different, because otherwise it looks like everybody was complicit in what the Third Reich did, which isn't the case, although clearly a lot are involved in it in some shape or form. And people can say I'm being very cynical and grumpy, but I don't take much stock in what these thousands of Germans said who lived within a few kilometers of these death camps, who said we didn't know what was going on. I'm sorry, you're seeing train after train going down there with people with their hands out the side of the wagons. You're seeing smoke rising daily from these ovens. The smell that there are people who are managing to break out of these camps. Poor, wretched people who've lost most of their body weight, who are crawling through German fields, knocking on doors, eating sugar beet or raw vegetables from fields. If you live near these sites of stuff, to say that you hadn't been aware of that for years, I think is a little bit dodgy. You've got to remember some of these killing sites, Dachau, had been established, before World War II. They were established in the mid-1930s. So again, I don't want anyone to think that I'm not saying there aren't good Germans, because of course there are good Germans. There are people who are doing their best, and the Nuremberg is doing the rounds now with Russell Crowe, and Albert Göring. So Göring's brother was an industrialist who was doing his best to help people, and we kind of now know that Hermann Göring kind of knew that his woke brother, by modern language, was doing everything he could to kind of save lives. He was sort of a humanitarian figure, and didn't. Hermann could have basically called the Gestapo in against his own brother. He had enough evidence. He had enough, and he didn't. Now, does that make Hermann Göring a good guy or does it make him a guy who just cares about his brother and is just kind of well, he's not derailing it too much, the regime. But the brother, Göring's brother, is clearly a good German. And the people who worked with him were good Germans, and the whole Oskar Schindler thing is a good German. And so, but as I say, the Germany needed to find some heroes after the war, and von Stauffenberg and to some extent von Choltitz and Paris was sort of a story they could look to find some moral courage to move forward. And, history needed these figures, even though we can be a bit cynical. People are making me a bit cynical about their exact motives now. I think, we need to address that these people were better than some, but not necessarily good. If that makes sense.
Definitely, 100% agree. And if von Stauffenberg did assassinate Hitler, you did mention briefly what his plans were, but in some more detail, what would have the regime looked like if Hitler had been assassinated? Like you said, it wouldn't have been surrendered to Eisenhower.
Well, we don't know the details of it, because obviously they're not leaving massive, great diaries full of information, and their PowerPoint presentations about step one, get rid of Hitler, step two. I mean, even Rommel's involvement is highly debated. It seems likely that the conspirators would have asked Rommel to head some sort of temporary contingency government, because it's a coup, essentially. It's a coup that needs the support of the military. You couldn't. Diplomats and politicians can't just go in and say they're in charge, even if they had eliminated all the people in the Third Reich's controlling area, the houses, the government buildings. You still don't control the country, because the country is a military state. The police force is run by the military, the army. So you'd need to have some kind of army figurehead. Seems like I'm giving people a lesson of how to manage a coup in their own countries. I'm not. But you'd need to have a key military figure that somehow transcends politics. And Rommel would have fitted the bill, because Rommel was sort of beloved by most of the men who served underneath him. He was respected by the aristocracy. He was respected by most fellow leaders. He hadn't fought on the Eastern Front, so he hadn't kind of got any real terrible baggage from there, although he had been involved in some sort of peripheral things with deportations and executions of Jews and things in North Africa, not something that is talked about much about on his CV there. So it seems that Rommel would have been brought in as some sort of, temporary figure. And then once they've kind of controlled the country, then sort of establish a new government. But the new government, by what we understand, would have been mostly along similar lines to just not basically the war being managed in a better way for the Germans to stand a chance of not necessarily gaining victory, but gaining a stronger bargaining position to deal with the Allies who are coming, but certainly not immediately just surrendering. That would have, the war would have gone on, and you could definitely argue there would have been more casualties, because von Stauffenberg has been at the front. He is a capable commander. Some of the guys alongside him have seen how the army is mismanaging things, how resources are going to the wrong places, and it could have been that a better generals would have been in charge for the next part of the war, which would have drawn it out. So,
yeah,
I mean, it's all conjecture and speculation, because we have the testimony of people like von Stauffenberg's widow, who interestingly was arrested, but Hitler never had her put to death or anything, which is odd, because you'd think, we know how if you Jacob were the next door neighbor of a Jewish family, right, in the war in Berlin, and you decide to help them out, and you help them get out on a train to Switzerland, right? The Gestapo would have arrested you and everybody else in your family. They wouldn't have gone, oh, well, it was only Jacob. They if you were married, your wife would have been in prison too. Your parents. So von Stauffenberg has literally just tried to kill Hitler, which you would think would be crime number one in terms of Hitler. But the wife is not actually. She's able to live, that alone. And some people suggest it's because Hitler had this weird kind of fear of aristocracy. And she is part of German establishment. And there's that kind of idea that goes on. I'm sure you've kind of come up with your other discussions, that no matter what happens in a country, no matter which government is in charge, no matter how bad things are, rich people keep on getting richer. And rich people are never really affected by the day-to-day stuff. Look at people like your namesake, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who comes out of COVID with more money than he went into. Most of us ended up having to, work on less and do less, but he comes out of it with more money. And I think Hitler seemed to have, I'm not making a direct comparison with Hitler, although viewers can do that themselves if they want to, is that I think he understands that Germany's aristocracy will always be there, regardless of whether the Reich is there, regardless of whether the Nazis are in power. And by July 44, I mean, even Hitler, in all his insanity and madness, must have in his heart of hearts, dear diary, I think we're losing the war. Because he's not going to say that to anybody. He's going to keep on doubling down, and they're going to, as you probably know, one of the awful, tragic things of World War II is those famous photos we see of Auschwitz with the railway line going right up to the gatehouse that we know. They are the railway lines built in 1944 for the murder of Hungary's Jews. Before that, the railway line finished a mile or two back. And so when Hungary, this is the summer of 44, summer into the early autumn of 1944, when Hungary eventually basically switched sides, they'd been sort of part of the Axis. They decided to sort of go in with the Soviets. They then become persona non grata. And so Hitler decides to remove all their Jews. And I forget the figures, 750,000, something like that. It's a lot. And basically, even at the point when Hitler should have been pumping resources from his point of view into the defense of Italy, the defense of Germany from the east in Operation Bagration, the Soviets moving in from the west, and the Allies in Normandy, they're building railway lines to Auschwitz in Poland, and they're adding to the infrastructure just to murder people. So they're doubling down, because weirdly, I may have said this in the last discussion, the only thing the Third Reich are still doing effectively in 44 is killing people, exterminating Jews. That's the only area of their regime that they're still actually can give themselves a pat on the back in their horrible, evil, twisted agenda for doing a job well, because they're getting even more efficient at it than they were 3 years earlier.
Yeah, it's incredible. And in terms of the aristocracy thing, why wouldn't have Hitler tried to exterminate, or did he try and exterminate a lot of the aristocracy when he first came into power, when he got total power? You would have thought that it would have been advantageous for him to do that if he was so scared of them.
I mean, who knows? I mean, it's, you know, if ever you read Mein Kampf, and I don't recommend it because it's, in addition to just being one of the most foul, evil books, it's just so badly written. He repeats himself endlessly. Paragraphs begin and don't go anywhere. Chapters make no sense. But it's basically all there. The vision is all there. This ideology is all there, about Slavic people, Jewish people and things and what have you, and all this stuff. And it seems that he just, despite all this, he just, as I said a minute ago, the pragmatist in him realizes that the aristocracy will always be there. And I guess it's to do with finance and banking and because it's the mid-management that makes the Holocaust function. It is the train operators. I don't mean the the fireman shoveling the coal in the engine. I mean the people who are managing the way the routes are being worked out. If you've seen Conspiracy, the film about the Wannsee Conference with Kenneth Branagh as Heydrich, it's not, to me, the bits that disturb me are not Heydrich ranting about the destruction of the Jews. It's the bureaucrats there who are talking about how they can streamline the railway system. Oh, if we tweak this here, we can get it. It's the mid-management people. It's those people today who go into businesses and try and streamline the efficiency by saying, well, you've got 3 people answering the telephone, you only need 2, that kind of thing. These people who are middle class, although that's not answering a question about the aristocracy, but I think it bleeds into it somehow. That the systems work because of banks, because of finance, because of pension schemes, because all that kind of stuff carries on in World War II. It's not like the Third Reich removed the fact that people, there are to some extent in Germany still, benefits for unemployed people and all that kind of stuff. There has to be finance. If you read Wages of Destruction by Adam Tooze, all about the German financial thing, is that every country's financial wealth is tied in with the rich. And don't get me started on billionaires right now, because it's separate to World War II. But, I think a lot of our problems today are because of people with way too much money controlling it. And I think Hitler knows that Germany functions to a certain extent in that same way, with people. The money is controlled by the aristocracy, and the Germany needs its resources. I mean, it all comes down to resources. The Germans have pumped all their money into synthetic fuel and synthetic rubber and all that. Even getting things like iron ore from Turkey, they've got to pay Turkey. That's money. That's bankers. So I think that's why he doesn't touch aristocracy, because it's it's all tied up with finance.
Yeah. Slightly separate, but kind of a combination of what you're saying about billionaires today and rich people in World War II. Have you ever looked at the Rothschilds' role in World War II? Because they were all over Europe and originated from Frankfurt in Germany, but they were Jewish. So have you ever read anything about them and their involvement?
Not specifically. I mean, I little things ring bells, but this is the we're getting into the odd territory of the fact that the way the world functioned in the 1920s and 30s, and whether the reality is that I suppose Jewish banking, Jewish legal system was making the world function. And if you're a normal person, you saw that as well. It just seems that they are the people best suited to this task. That's what it was back then. But the Nazis and in some ways the communist regime, who also frowned upon Jewish people, were looking out of the Treaty of Versailles, the end of the First World War. Everybody's looking for someone to punch down to blame for their sins. And there's so many parallels with today is that I genuinely believe that if you think that the reason that your bins aren't being collected as much as they used to be, and the fact that things are costing you more in the shop, if you think that's to do with desperate people clinging on to dinghies in the channel, then and not at a much higher level of the way money is being held, then I think you're wrong. And I think in the 20s and 30s, people are looking to someone to punch down to. And so that, I know that's not the question you asked, but that's where you start to get this whole idea of it all being the fault of Jewish people and families like the Rothschilds. And there's a great book, Wine and World War II, about the French wine industry in World War II, which is a slightly kind of rosy view of the wine, because again, a lot of the French vineyards, the money behind them, the ownership is Jewish, and how that France depends on this industry for so much. And these families had a very complicated role to play, because they're being accused of things that are in some ways true, but you're in charge of banking. Yeah, we know with that, because that's how it's been working. Go back to Merchant of Venice, Shakespeare, the Shylock, the Jewish moneylender. It had been Jewish people were in charge of finances going back hundreds of years. So that's how it worked. It was great. It was the system. So all these families like the Rothschilds end up being involved in this sort of struggle that is way bigger than just them, and having to find their own place in it. And it gets very complicated, and it's anti-Semitism is still tragically around today, and people are still finding reasons to single out these families and say, well, perhaps they didn't do as much as they could have done in World War II. They weren't doing, I don't know, maybe. It's, but we'll do the Catholic Church and the Vatican next. I can really piss people off if we want to. But
well, in terms of the Catholic Church, then what? I guess people, in terms of just to end like the anti-Semitism thing, no one likes a successful minority, and it's just such a shame that that's the case. And people use them as scapegoats, because I guess if there's less of them and they're doing well, it's easy for the masses who are struggling or resentful about their own situation to shift the blame on them wrongly. But in terms of the Catholic Church, what was their involvement in World War II, or lack of involvement in World War II, like?
Well, it's a lack of, and I mean, we could spend hours talking about this. And I'm not a subject expert, but I'll start by talking about 1948. So when Israel is trying to become a nation, there've been all of the wars out there, 47, 48, and they kind of declare themselves an independent state. They don't exist until someone gives them credibility. Another country has to say, yeah, we will support you. And it happens today. It happens when some of these African countries have splintered, and someone has. You can't just claim you're a new country. I can't just go out into my street and spray paint a little circle and say, this is Woody land, right? I can, but it doesn't become a nation until someone else recognizes it. And they'll all go, well, that idiot in the hat. No, you can't. So Israel needed someone. And I think it may have been the first country, but if not, they were among the first significant country was the USA. The USA said, well, we will recognize Israel as a state, right? And then all the other countries, in an era when the world respected the USA and were looking to the USA for leadership and moral guidance, et cetera, et cetera. And so therefore, there begins the process of Israel becoming an official nation, right? In 1933, when the Third Reich, Hitler does win the vote, but there's some dodginess there in how the system is worked and blah 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 blah. And the end of the Weimar Republic is very complicated and juicy and involves lots of sort of political manipulations and murders and outstings, this that. But one of the first outside organizations, if you want to call it, that recognized the authority of the Third Reich was the Catholic Church and the Pope himself.
Wow.
It was in the film Nuremberg. In the film, the Justice Jackson goes to visit the Pope and wants the Pope to basically kind of support the fact they're inventing a new series of laws, the crimes against humanity laws that are the basis of the Nuremberg trials, which didn't exist prior to them. You can only be tried essentially for actually murdering someone yourself. You couldn't really be just tried for being an evil person and overseeing an evil cause that has to come in. And then now there is this, crimes against humanity, crimes against the peace of the world. And basically in the film, and I'm simplifying the film, the Justice Jackson kind of semi-blackmails the Pope into saying, but if you don't recognize the fact we're trying to bring these people to trial, we will kind of remind you that in 33 you absolutely did recognize the Third Reich. And I mean, it gets very complicated, and the Pope is in an awkward position because he's, you know, the Catholic Church has Catholics in all the countries that were overrun by the Germans, and to protect them, they decide it's similar to Pétain in France. You know, what do you do? But the difference is the Vatican wasn't invaded, whereas France was invaded, lost the war, and therefore Pétain had to decide how to deal with Hitler. He was way too accommodating and is a villain, and I'm not a great supporter of Pétain, but he made a decision based on the information he had at the time. But the Catholic Church didn't seem to me to need to rush in to validate the Third Reich, and they didn't do enough to condemn things. They didn't do enough to you know. I will. My caveat is there were many individual Catholic priests and Catholic families around Europe who did extraordinary things to help Jews and help Allied pilots, things like that. I'm talking about the official policy of the Catholic Church in World War II, and the Vatican was a little bit suspect. So you know, there you go.
But could that also be related to the fact that for most of World War II, Italy was run by Mussolini, right? What was the relationship between the Vaticans and Mussolini when he was on the side of the Nazis in the Axis?
Well, they were, I mean, I don't want to go as far as saying they were kind of hand in hand, but they were kind of hand in hand to some extent. I mean, the Italy, even today, even 80 years later, is a strong, very fiercely Catholic country, and very, you know, proud of its religious heritage and its cathedrals and its all that, its churches, and the to some extent Mussolini and what he was offering sort of aligned with some of the values of the church, in the sense that, you know, there's a power system in place that works for everybody and kind of understands it. And, you know, I don't want to speak out of a subject I'm not expert on, but trust me, the Catholic Church did not cover itself with glory in the war years. You know, I mean, if how far do you take it? If they had made some big dramatic stand, they more officials within the Catholic Church might have been imprisoned, and I mean, many were, but often they were imprisoned by the Nazis for helping Jews and helping Allied pilots. They weren't persecuted necessarily because they were Catholic. They were persecuted because they were doing something that pissed off the Third Reich. Whereas, obviously, being Jewish was a crime from the beginning. So being a Catholic wasn't a crime, but being a Catholic terrorist, as a Third Reich would have seen it, was a crime. But so, as I'm reinforcing my idea, the Catholic individuals within the Catholic Church did a lot to help the Allies in World War II. But the Pope himself and the Vatican, look it up. Look even Wikipedia will explain the rather complicated reputation. He doesn't. I forget which Pius or something, or whoever it was in World War II. He doesn't come in many votes of the best popes ever. he's not. You know, he's not regarded very well. You know, even within the Catholic Church, he's not the kind of person you bring up as a good example of togetherness and spirit and you know, the world working together and standing against evil. He's not. No, not in that category.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in these people and these narratives that often are almost mythological or put on a pedestal. We mentioned the Germans putting people on a pedestal that seemed to go against the Nazis and other characters. I'm interested because we mentioned Churchill quite a lot last episode. I was wondering what your take is on Churchill, how much of his national hero, I guess, pedestal he's put on, how much of that is actually mythology versus what has been recorded? Like, what do people get wrong?
How long do you say we've got for this? Yeah, okay, so I'm broadly a Churchill fan. I absolutely think, and and realize that Churchill was an integral part of a galvanizing of spirit and optimism and motivation in 1940 and beyond, that I'm not sure anybody else would have done a similar thing.
Yeah.
I can't see, if Chamberlain had stayed, or Halifax, or even if there'd been some kind of emergency election, if Attlee had come in, and I love Attlee as a post-war prime minister, I can't see anybody having the way with words and just the charisma that Churchill had to do what he did, to really get the first step of the way to defeating the Third Reich. I think we can put that in some ways on Churchill. But he wants to retain an empire. That's a lot of his motivation, is about empire. His whole soft underbelly of Europe attitude of the Mediterranean is to do with Suez Canal and British, territorial rights and trade and pre-war world and post-war world. And when Churchill and Roosevelt and their staffs have several of their low points in World War II, it's particularly around the time of the end of 42, early 43, Operation Torch in North Africa, is that they have different visions for the world beyond the defeat of the Third Reich, that Hitler wants it to all go back to how it was. And to some extent, Roosevelt has empire ambitions as well, with, Puerto Rico, Philippines, all that kind of stuff. That he's not solely thinking about it from a continental USA point of view, but Roosevelt and some of the other leaders are more like, well, you do realize, Winston, that when this war ends, things will have to change. And Winston's like, why do they need to? But we like having an empire. So he will, as the years pass, he will inevitably be judged more on that aspect, in addition to his great successes in 1940, because we will be looking at that era more from a modern point of view. I mean, what is already happening is someone like yourself, you're younger than me. The language that was your normal language when you were at school was a bit different to the language when I was at school. And it'll be harder in another couple of generations. Your grandkids will, I think, struggle to find anything that Churchill said back then that isn't by some definition dodgy. Just terms for different peoples, different, the way I'm not saying he was misogynistic and racist, although he displays both those characteristics, but then so did everybody else back then. They were using language that we have now quite correctly realized is not appropriate language. So I think it'll be harder in a 2 generations time to find quotes from Churchill. We can't really say that. You can't use that word now. That's a bit, and that means, I think, inevitably he will slip off that pedestal a bit. But at the same time, he's so iconic. I don't see him ever really being dislodged from that, because that lofty position that he mostly deserves, because he did galvanize the country. Just his, the enthusiasm he had for commando forces, that kind of thing, airborne forces, was incredibly important in the reinventing of the British Army, the British military in World War II. The fact that Roosevelt liked him, I mean, we're in an era now where I don't know how many relationships between world figures can you think of where it's perfect, where they get on. I'm struggling to think of any right now. I'm thinking of Macron and Starmer. I'm thinking of Trump and various. I mean, I'm trying to think of any world leader that's genuinely good mates with another world leader. I'm sure there are some, when you get to the kind of the lesser, I'm sure there are some like neighboring African countries where they get on quite well, but I can't think of anything. But Churchill and Roosevelt got on. How much is that worth? Yeah, they had some disagreements, but they were able to see them through because they liked each other. How important was that? How there was no major throwing of teddies out of prams by Churchill and Roosevelt. They were like, oh, God, and they would put the phone down, and time difference would allow things because to pass, and then one would kind of apologize, the other one they would carry on, and all that. And at the key, that key relationship between those two figures was foundational. Churchill and Eisenhower got on. Did a show on my World War II TV a couple of weeks ago with John Jordan about his book on Eisenhower and Churchill's relationship. They had some disagreements, but they basically saw the world through similar eyes, if that makes sense. And so Churchill is incredibly important. But yeah, he's a man of his time. I mean, he was born in the middle of the last century, not the last century. You know, so of course his views on things we go, oh, cringe, you know, because it would be wrong if it hadn't have evolved. You know, Abraham Lincoln said things. You know, Thomas Jefferson. You know, all these figures said things. George Washington said things in ways that we go, that's weird. And it's their attitudes were formed at the time when they formed them in these different relationships between peoples. And but I urge people to just be objective and to criticize people for the genuine things they deserve to be criticized for, not necessarily the clunky way they said them. The big thing about Churchill that one of the big things that people debate is the Bengal famine. So India got hit, and not just India, that part of the world, Southeast Asia, got hit by just awful weather patterns that caused this drought, that caused this big, you know, there was no food, right? And hundreds of thousands of Indians died. Hundreds of thousands. And the argument is, could Churchill have diverted more supplies from other parts of the world to India to help out? And there's a logistical answer that is basically, it would have been very hard with the time it took to get things from places, to get them to places. The distribution of it would be very complicated. You know, it's very complicated. And the fact that there is a need to conserve resources for the defeat of the Third Reich, which means Operation Torch, Operation Husky. And it's similar to the fact, I'm going off on a tangent, when people talk about why did the Allies not bomb the infrastructure of the railways towards Auschwitz, for example, the death camps, Sobibor, Treblinka. Why did they just not try and destroy those railway lines so the Germans couldn't get those poor people there to kill them? They are deep into Poland, which means if you're flying from England, you're not going to get more than 10% of your aircraft to there because they're going to get shot down before they get there. But also, and I'm simplifying things, the methodology the Allies employed was the best way to save. They knew what was happening. People say, "Oh, they didn't know what was it." They did. They didn't know the full extent of the 1,200 sites of death, but they basically knew because people had become Poles and things had escaped and told them what was happening there. But their reasoning was, and I don't disagree with this, is that the best way to save the people who are being murdered is to bring the war to an end quickly and defeat Hitler. That's the best way. Trying to directly stop the people being murdered is not the correct use of our resources. And I can see why people find that very difficult, because it sounds like you don't care about the human life. And the same thing applies to Bengal, this famine, in that it appears that Churchill is being inhumane and uncaring towards people who are part of his empire. This is India, by that sense, is British. They are British citizens, not Indian. They're Indian, but you know what I mean. They're his people. But the way I'm going with this is that I've seen people on social media say, the Bengal famine is Churchill's fault. He started it. And this is when I go, oh, fuck off. No, We can absolutely have the debate about how he managed the resources. That's a debate worth having. But don't claim he actually he didn't bugger about with the weather pattern. He didn't have some direct line to God and say, look, actually, can you just not have it rain for 6 months here? That's just ridiculous to suggest that he caused the Bengal famine. But I've seen supposedly rational human beings on social media. I've seen people suggest he was responsible for it, and that's just and the same people, by the way, have also there's that podcast from the USA, Daryl Cooper, is it?
Yeah,
Something.
I'm not sure. I haven't heard of it.
A nutter, an absolute nutter, right? Who is saying that the villain of World War II is Churchill. And this, the other guy, the guy, I'll come to him in a minute. New US show host kind of thing has had this guy on his channel, and they've had this rational discussion about Hitler being the worst guy in World War II. Now, okay, again, we can look at some of the decisions made by the chiefs of staff in Britain and the USA. Sometimes some of the decisions they made, with hindsight, weren't maybe the right one. Maybe more resources or less resources should have gone to Italy. Maybe Normandy could have been. There's management of the war effort that we can go, okay, we didn't pick the right team for that one. Like analyzing a football match the Sunday morning. We can all say, oh, well, the problem is he played this guy in the wing. He should never have played him. He should have gone for the four in the midfield diamond, blah, 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 blah. So we can absolutely see ways in which the Allies could have got things a bit better to bring the war to an end. But that's very different than suggesting that Churchill is a worse guy than Hitler. And Stalin, who is on our side, but equally bad. And, but people are buying into this. They're buying into this bullshit of Churchill being the villain of World War II. His language is clunky. He's got views of his time, but he's not a villain by any stretch of the imagination. He's not a villain, right? And if you're listening to this and you think that's the case, you need to kind of give your head a wobble because it's just nonsense, right?
Yeah. So why do people think Churchill is more of a villain than Hitler? Is it purely just for outrage and social media views? Like, what are the reasons they put out there to say that Hitler's worse? I don't know, Churchill's worse than Hitler.
I mean, part of it is that whole just trying to be cool, trying to be the cool kid, the kid that wants to say the earth is flat, because it's cool, because it's against the establishment, and that kind of stuff. Part of it is that, but part of it is all sort of connected with this bloody awful, anti-Semitism and acceptance of fascism that is sort of prevalent today. People stupidly looking to Third Reich and World War II leaders for some kind of leadership. I mean, I run a World War II podcast, so part of my daily job is making sure that I check my comments. There isn't some awful Holocaust denier coming into the comments, leaving something awful, or saying that we fought the wrong side in World War II, that kind of thing, because these people exist out there. And because of social media, because of everything else, they've got a platform where they would have been a weirdo in the pub 50 years ago who shouted at nobody except the pigeons in the park. But now they shout at the world because they've got a platform. And then they find other people like them, which in their stupid brains validates their thinking. And it kind of snuck. Tucker Carlson is the guy who interviewed Daryl. Yeah. Tucker Carlson interviewed him, and they're sitting there having this learned conversation like we are, with ties on, about Churchill being the big villain in World War II. I just watch it and I go, how is this happening? Why is there not outrage at this conversation? And again, I'm not saying we can't analyze Churchill's faults. We can't. Of course he's imperfect. Of course he is. But villain? Don't. That and the AI slop that is being fed into my feeds on a daily tsunami basis. I worry about where we're going. I worry about. That's why I will support people like yourself who are out there trying to get decent information, interview people who know their arse and their elbow, and try and get some decent information out there, because there's a tsunami of bullshit coming into our doors and our screens every day right now.
Yeah, and specifically in terms of information about your expertise, D-Day and World War II, when it comes to AI, how is that affecting your career and your content and what you're seeing? Is there loads of misinformation? You mentioned before we started talking about the AI photos and images. So how's that affecting you?
Well, it is. I don't know whether we're even at the peak of how bad it's going to go. I mean, I will phrase it. I will start by saying AI is here to stay. Us all saying it's crap would be like people in the late 1940s saying we need to undo inventing nuclear bombs. You know, that the reality is they're here now. We have to live in a world with them, and somehow, and I think, weirdly, in my lifetime, we've kind of got to a way where we have sort of managed, I hope, we've got nuclear weapons, and we haven't dropped one for a few decades. Touch wood. You know? But AI is not going to go away. It's just a question of can we see it? Can we see through this rough patch out the other side, where it'll be a tool? Because that's what it is. When I get to the point where I'm editing my book, I'll be able to do things with AI now that I couldn't do 10 years ago for things like organizing sources. It's a big, expanded, cleverer version of just kind of search engine. You know, I can say, find me where this quote is from. How many times do I quote from this book here? How many times? And I can feed it all that stuff within my own little kind of system on my PC and use it to be my slave, to do the stuff that I don't like doing, that I will make a human mistake. It can do all that. It can do the indexing perfectly. On which page do I mention a current on? It'll go, you mentioned it on pages 18, 19, blah, blah, blah. And if I change the page numbering, it'll work. That's what it's there. And therefore, and as a means of researchers assimilating sources and even doing some analysis, I think it will have a place. There's some very, very respected friends of mine who are very, very good, super sexy historians. Michael Nyberg, who teaches at the War College, who is kind of one of my absolute, still have kind of a historian crush when I speak to Mike, because I think he's so incredible. He's starting to teach about the use of AI and how it will revolutionize history. But right now, there's just slop coming in, and what they're doing is these people are playing on our emotions. They're using little bits of emotionally wrought stuff. They're using the Holocaust. They're using veterans returning to battlefields, and they're creating these stories that are basically a little bit similar to something that's real. And they pour into my feed all the time, and people are liking them by their tens of thousands, because it's virtue signaling, but it's working. You'll get this little story coming. It's an AI image, and it looks, even 6 months ago, I could spot the AI images instantly. Now I'm going, is that AI?
Wow.
Because they're getting better.
Yeah.
And I'm going, I think that's AI. It used to be the fingers. The hands and fingers were a giveaway. Even 6 months ago, now they're getting the hands right. It's like that film Lucy with Scarlett Johansson, where she gets.
I think so. Yeah.
These things they're developing so fast that our human brains can't deal with it. AI is improved. While we've had this conversation, AI has improved by a certain number of percentage.
Yeah.
And in 6 months it'll be even but which way it's going, I don't know. So they'll have this AI image of a GI liberating Buchenwald, and it will say something, and it's all written in very emotionally. It's all AI created. I don't think a human is involved at all. Jim was a 21-year-old kid from Ohio, and he met this little boy from Buchenwald who he gave his bar of chocolate to. 40 years later, Jim returned to Buchenwald, and little boy was there. He'd come back for the anniversary, and he had the wrapper from the chocolate bar that he'd kept all this time, blah, 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 blah. And people like it because it's heartwarming. And now these sorts of things did happen, but this particular story and this image is just, is not real. It's not, it's just slop, and they get repeated daily. They're the same variation of the same thing all the time. And the D-Day stuff, Jim was a soldier on Omaha Beach who returned 40 years later and met a French kid. It's the same story, but from a different angle. And it's very worrying, because I can use my analytical skills to say that can't be Omaha Beach, that image, because the cliffs are in the wrong place, or that church tower that's not a French church tower. But your average person, is hooked by the emotional telling of the story that bypasses the analytical part of their brain. Because they're very clever at what they do. They're manipulative. And then you share it, and each time you share it, exponentially, that many more people are seeing it. And I worry about it, and I worry about. These stories, you could argue they're not doing any harm, in that this made-up story about Jim giving a chocolate bar to a kid in Buchenwald, if it's highlighting, if it's reminding a reader of that the Holocaust happened, then that's a good thing. So I kind of get that. Except I'm going, but why not use a real story? Why not have a real story of a real person, one of the many books about the Holocaust, one of the many Holocaust survivor books, and find in it a story of similar emotional depth, and have the real name of the real person and and a real photo there, because that way you're adding something real. Because the danger, and this is where there's no D-Day denial going on, right? I say that. Who knows what's around the But no one is saying D-Day didn't happen. It happened in a warehouse in New Mexico. And, there is no. It's all a conspiracy. No one's saying that about D-Day, but they are saying that about the Holocaust. And so, and I don't understand how AI. I don't know how the tech work. I don't know how the servers and the brains work, but what I do know is that if you're a Holocaust denier, if you're one of these horrible or awful warped individuals who doesn't think the Holocaust happened, and you see an AI created image telling a fake Holocaust story, you can then claim this story is made up, which is then muddying the waters of what's real and what's not real, because they're saying, oh, well, if it really happened, why would they be needing to fake an image of it? And that's worrying. If people going to that, yes. So if you're a vulnerable person who is already susceptible to conspiracies, and you're now thinking, yeah, AI, and then people are now maybe thinking that the real footage taken at Belsen was AI generated. That I don't think that's happening yet. I mean, I think I may have said this in the first discussion with him. Maybe it was someone else. Eisenhower, when he was taken through Dachau, I think it was, some of the Dachau satellite camps it was March 45 or April 45. And there's like 5 US Army photographers there or something. He just go and get more. And he basically makes sure that every single photographer from like X number of miles around rushes there and takes photos. Because he thinks this is so the inhumanity here is on such a monumentally terrible scale. People will not be able to, in the future, people will not be able to believe this happened. And I can see where he's saying that, because we know about the Holocaust. If you've grown up in a vacuum, right, and all you know is the world you live in, and suddenly you're presented the details of the Holocaust, it sounds crazy. What? Sorry. Are you saying that a regime literally murdered 11 million people over the course of a few years because they were of a different culture? Yeah. And no one stopped it? No, not really. It sounds bonkers. You can kind of understand, like, 20 people being killed. I think it was Stalin said that, one murder is 100 murders is just politics, whatever he said. So Eisenhower was somehow very, he foreshadowed correctly, unfortunately, an era where Holocaust denial will be rife. So with this AI stuff, I mean, if there's an AI video, I mean, I've seen that AI kind of comedy AIs where they'll make up an image of, I don't know, Jim Morrison of the Doors jamming with Buddy Holly and who else? Freddie Mercury, right? That's harmless, no one's gonna suggest that this video is affecting the actual legacy of Freddie Mercury's music with Queen, it's just a bit of fun, right? But when you're tackling into history and the Holocaust, it's not good. It's dodgy. So yeah, I'm genuinely a bit worried about how we will get through this period, which incidentally is coinciding with the period of the World War II generation dying and Holocaust survivors passing on, so that we'll have to bridge this. The information we're being given to educate people will be influenced by AI, and the people who were there who can say, but that's bullshit, son, won't be there to say it for us. So that's two reasons to be a bit alarmed about the next 10, 15 years, and if I as a kid had suggested the Holocaust didn't happen, my granddad, who was in World War II, would have put me right very quickly. So there's lots of challenges facing a content creator about World War II like myself, AI being one of them. A lack of, accountability for putting stuff out into an environment, in that, yes, if you're producing an academic book for a university press, it has to be peer reviewed, et cetera, but you can self-publish now, and you can write a book. Well, there are AI books about D-Day. I have seen them on Amazon. Fake author, and it's just created by AI. Wow. I've not read one yet because I feel that I will end up getting quite cross. But what might alarm me is that it's actually better than I think it would be.
Why would that alarm you?
Because I would be naturally suspicious that, therefore, if AI could seemingly replicate what a historian would do, would there therefore be a need for a historian? But the difference would be is that if an AI book had got it right, it would only be right because it was basing it on past works that already exists in the ether, because an AI couldn't, in this regard, do anything predictive about new evaluation. So a historian who discovers that a unit that we didn't think took part on June the 6th did in fact take part on June the 6th, and it was hushed up for some sort of reason. I mean, it's unlikely to happen now, but that would give that historian the tag to have a subject to write a book about, and then it would add to our information. But AI couldn't find that until it existed. So because AI can't take our understanding forward. It can only, it can theoretically successfully reproduce what we've already learned.
Yeah.
But it can't add anything new. At least I don't think it can. Although that said, I know historians who've asked ChatGPT and things to evaluate decision making. That they have said, why do you think General Montgomery did this tactic for Caen? And ChatGPT will give a response. Now, what I don't know is how many sources ChatGPT and these other things are using to get that. Is it just using the first thing it gets to on Google, Wikipedia, or is it? I mean, it cannot be doing the work right now of a historian to get 20 books on their desk and all these different archives and painstakingly read them all and try and formulate. It can't be doing that yet.
Mm.
But some historians I know are saying that it can be quite useful for clarifying and making of something that is difficult to untangle, make it make sense. I'm arguing myself now. I'm kind of saying AI is bad, but also good. I think that's why we're in this weird transition. I mean, I hope there'll be people who steer it in the right way. But the other thing about AI is that its root is it's having to make money, because I know from my limited understanding is people are investing huge amounts of money into this. So it'll have to make money, whereas I don't know more than a handful of historians who are really motivated by money in terms of what their work is. Yes, they need to have a living and selling books. If that's your primary source of income, you need to sell some books. But if you're, but it's not their it's not their thing that drives them. But AI would have to have that element of it being financially successful, which is scary. I'm flitting back and forth between liking it and not liking it.
Yeah, well, it is nuanced, because like you said earlier, it can be used as a tool. It's just actually whether the humans that are using it, the humans that are creating it, the humans that own that particular AI or that company, do the correct or moral thing and don't take advantage of it. I still think it's all down to, at the moment, as things are, it's still all down to what us humans do. And I think that's what we can kind of summarize about the conversation so far, is it's actually down, not just down to the big organization or Hitler or Stalin or Churchill. It's also down to the people in middle management, the individuals. And I guess it shouldn't be ignored, the individual's stance on things, the individual's opinion on things, the individual's actions on things. And that's why AI can be such a confusing and back and forth topic, because it also depends on how you use it, and also depends on the incentives of the individuals trying to make money from it, which is, a whole different can of worms. But I was going to ask, actually, you mentioned you're seeing all of this content, this fake World War II content, these fake World War II stories created by AI. And obviously with all your expertise and incredible experience, you can pick that out. And you said a lot of people in the public won't be able to pick that out as easily. I'd be interested to see or know if you've done or thought of any content you could create as a pushback against that, where you review content and you're like, okay, no, this didn't happen because that church isn't a French church. Those cliffs aren't on Omaha. I think that'd be really interesting piece of content for people to see, because I myself would probably get tricked as well, because I'm not as knowledgeable on it as you are. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, definitely. I mean, it's teaching people the art of critical thinking rather than necessarily telling them what to look for in, AI would always get tank wheels wrong, right? Is a very specific way of, but arming people with the tools to kind of examine on a broader level would be good. But the thing is, being a bit negative about it, is it would only work if people care about whether what they're getting is right or wrong. And I think that the shortness of these AI things, they're meant to be read in less than a minute. The TikToks and these other things, they're all 10, 15 seconds. They're not, I don't know they're necessarily designed to have any kind of lasting impact and to create a thing where that person who reads it is walking around thinking about that all day. It's just it's an instant kind of gratification thing. That's maybe subliminally affecting them. But I think if I analyzed AI, it would take me 5 times longer to analyze it than it would for the actual thing to have run. And therefore, the people who should watch it would not watch it because my evaluation would be 50 minutes of a 2-minute clip type. And unless I could somehow do it in such a way that I could do it in bullet, in like in a sentence of this is wrong. And here's the 5-word summary of why it's wrong. But I don't know that would be possible because you'd have to break it down and try and make how explained. So I don't know how. I mean, I did just add on my YouTube channel. I did add a little bit to my banner, a bit of text saying no AI and fake, real historians, because I felt I wanted to make it just a little bit more obvious. I added my face to the banner that it's a real human being with a stupid hat talking to historians who in a different part of the world who are having an actual conversation about history, as opposed to a program in Beijing or something where they've said compose a 2,000-word script about X, and we know that's happening. We know there are entire YouTube 10-minute things that have been entirely created by a computer. The imaging, the text, the script, and even the narration, the AI narration. And weirdly, sometimes I notice them because they're getting the pronunciations too well. In one of my historian friends was on fairly recently, who's written about the 12th SS in Normandy, and he's Canadian, and he butchers all the French place names. But I like that because it reminds me and the viewers that he's a real guy who doesn't speak French. And so he says it in the wrong way. But AI is sort of using all those resources so that the narrations end up being a little bit too perfect. It's that, what's that movie, Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams about 20 years ago, when they're making a human face for him. And they said, people always try and make them too perfect. You've got to get in all the fact that our faces aren't symmetrical. So in some ways, my channel, on a regular live stream discussion, there'll be moments where I or my guest will lose our train of thought and go, I've forgotten that person's name. Oh, it'll come to me in a minute. Like I did with you. I forgot Tucker Carlson's name. That I think is reassuring because you realize it is 2 people. It's not a bot created thing. It's 2 people having a discussion, and the discussion will change as it goes along as well. And that's this idea about the AI, at least now, can't replicate research and discussion and a collaboration where you're discussing ideas and tossing them around in a pub environment. I mean, where, that's a very good point. Jeff, I hadn't thought about the fact that 3rd Armored Division had left its fuel barrels at so-and-so. That may have been why they turned left at this crossroads there. That's a very good point. Then someone else says, and don't forget the weather was, and you're reevaluating a battle in real time. AI can't do that. At least, again, not now. So, I mean, we're definitely in a transition era for how we assimilate information about the past. World War II, the veterans generation is going. AI is coming in. Libraries are less fashionable than they used to be. People, I think, have the first thing they find is the best resource rather than is it the best resource. You Google and you go, here's the thing. Oh, that says what? That's answered the question. But why is that coming up, that page? And now it's come up for you and you've gone there, that is reinforcing the algorithm that page is the best page. So the next person has even more chance of being pushed to that page because another one person and it's, as I understand it, it's based on the popularity as opposed to accuracy. And if I set up 100 accounts online and I say, Jacob's podcast regularly talks about dinosaurs, right? And I set one up that says Jason's podcast regularly talks about photography. does it mean that if there are 100 people saying that that Google starts to think that you're a dinosaur expert because it's fine? I think that's how it works, isn't it? Sort of broadly.
That is, yeah. The more clicks and stuff, and then obviously AI will get trained on that as well.
Yeah, and then because people don't know, if you're spending time on a page, AI can't tell whether you're being satisfied whether you're being on that page or not. You might be looking at it going, "What the hell is this?"
Yeah.
But isn't seeing the fact you're connected to a page and going, "But this isn't even about dinosaurs. This is about photography." But AI doesn't know that you're sitting there, the viewer's watching them, but I'm on the wrong link. And then you back out of it and you go back to Google again, and then you find the correct page. But then by then you just cross. You go, "Oh, fuck it, I'll go and have a cup of tea." So you're leaving the bots the idea that the first page you went to, where in fact you were staring at it going, "Well, this can't be right," is the one you wanted to be on in the first place, and therefore suggest it to other people who are also looking for something else. I've confused my own head there. But I think that's how it works, isn't it?
It can be incredibly misleading in so many different ways, and that's the thing that needs to be tightened, I think. And in terms of misinformation, obviously you mentioned the gradual fading out of veterans. They're obviously now dying and passing away. As a historian who's spoken to a lot of veterans and wants to not spread misinformation, what does that feel like for you in terms of responsibility to continue what the veterans have told you? Now they can't say it themselves.
Well, I mean, I'm very sad. I mean, I really have only got one remaining World War II veteran who I would consider a friend, and actually he's more my wife's friend. She knows him better than I do. George Mullins. He was 101st Airborne, 327th Glider, but he will call our house every now and then, and I was always wave and say hello, but he calls Mag rather than me, but he's my only one left. So I'm very sad on that kind of personal sense that I've lost some friends. But balancing with this act is that we cannot allow ourselves to get in a position where we take everything every veteran said as being 100% irrefutable truth, because like any human beings, they get things wrong. And the simple way I always say is a veteran will rarely get the emotional truth wrong, but they quite well remember the wrong day, or the wrong date, or the wrong unit, or the wrong tank. You know, that, "Oh yeah, me and my mate, we knocked out a Tiger tank coming down the road in whatever town, in Caen, in July 44. And you kind of go, it would have been a Panzer IV, actually, not a Tiger tank. And then they look at you and you know you've kind of messed up because you've derailed their story, but you feel this need to correct them. But what you remind yourself is that when they're telling you, there's that bit in Saving Private Ryan when they're preparing the sticky bombs with the axle grease and the socks. When you first hear the German armored vehicles coming, it shows like the sand and the grit and the stones on the side of the pavement kind of vibrating, and you hear that first. I've had veterans tell me what it was like when you first heard that, that thunder of an armored vehicle coming out of a hedgerow, or the beginning of the drone of an enemy bomber coming in, that's got a fighter bomber that's going to come. And they tell you that, oh God, that moment there, I jumped in that foxhole and I was terrified. And, that's, they're not making that stuff up.
Yeah.
But sometimes they'll say, "Oh yeah, well, the airfield we had was we saw loads of B-17s parked there or something." You think, well, it wouldn't have been B-17s, it would have been C-47s or something. So a veteran's testimony is a tool in the historian's toolbox, but it has to be used in conjunction with all the other tools we have of war diaries and archives and logic and assessment. And, I'm the book I'm working on right now. I was struggling to connect up the days French people were remembering the bombardments. And I was going, okay, well, that can't be June the 7th. That wasn't the bombardment that day. It was June the 6th. And I was trying to just create a timeline, and it just wasn't working because I was using accounts by these French people who had been writing about it 60 or 80 years after war, who were maybe 10 or 11 during the war. One particular account I'm using, the girl, her father put her in one drawer of a big old chest of drawers when the bomber stuff, and put the younger sister in another drawer of the chest of drawers, then kind of threw all the bed linen on top of it and the cushions and stuff on top of it to kind of absorb anything that happened. And when the kids come out of it later on, they couldn't find the dad. It turned out the dad was outside in the street cleaning up rubble or something like that. And she says this account happened on the 6th, and it was actually the 7th, or it was the 7th that it happened on the 6th. And I'm part of me is going, well, it can't be right then, because she's got the date wrong. And I'm going, no, you idiot. She's just misremembering the date. She was 10 and bombs were exploding.
Yeah.
She's not making up this story about getting in the drawer of the chest of drawers and being terrified when she couldn't find her father. So I've rejigged the chapter to just say, so it's two parts. It's like, first I talk about the Allies had these various raids on the town of La Haye-du-Puits from June the 5th through to June the 7th. Heavy bombers, medium bombers, blah, blah, blah. Here, and I forget how I'm wording it now, but here are a collective set of responses of the people who are under these bombs. But I've now not bothered to try and make the dates work up because there's no point. But I could say to myself, well, because I can't verify the date, I shouldn't put the accounts in at all. So, no, that's not wrong, because the accounts give it the human interest we need to understand what that bombing was like from the ground, as well as what it was like in the RAF or the US Air Force flying ahead. So it's about marrying it all up, which is, comes back to this AI thing. AI will be a tool we use, and the historian will use it, but use it for what it does. It should be our slave. If we're all going to theoretically be working fewer hours and we're not going to be working as hard in the next couple of generations, then AI should be doing the jobs for us that we don't want to do ourselves. The AI should be taking the bin. The AI should be sweeping out the slop at the bottom of the kitchen bin. That's what I want AI to do. I want AI to do my gutters for me, or the mud out of it when I do that. I don't want AI to take my creative spark away. I don't want AI to tell me where I want to go on holiday. I want to have a discussion with my partner and say, well, what about there? That sounds nice. And you look and maybe it's a bit too cold that time of year. I want to do the creative thinking human bit myself and have AI do all the other stuff. So the historian can, I did a show on my channel last week, Project 44, an amazing online mapping system for World War II, where we're talking with Nathan, one of the creators there, where there's an idea in the future where historians can submit data to this. Think of it as like a World War II specific Google Earth, right? Where eventually the tech will be in place where you submit in all the movements of the 2nd Battalion South Lancashire Regiment on June the 7th, and use it, and it'll create a map for you. It'll create a map that you could either share as a 3D thing, or you could have a printable version you could put in a book. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
There's AI to some extent involved in that, in that it is a computer that is doing the heavy hitting and the calculating and the number crunching to create that. But the historian is giving it the information to make that. That's how we should be using it. AI being our I'm into Planet of the Apes territory now, aren't I? And and robots.
I didn't realize how many pivots you've actually made in your career so far. So you spent 20 years as a World War II reenactor, then a battlefield guide for over a decade and a half.
Yeah.
And then you built a YouTube channel from scratch. And most people at your age would probably be too scared to make big career changes, but you keep reinventing yourself, and you have reinvented, which is really admirable. Could you walk me through that journey, and how does the way you understand the war now compared to when you were younger driving military trucks around?
Well, you also missed out that I was a fire juggler and a fire breather in a circus for one season. And I've done bookbinding and print works and stuff like that as well. I was a film extra for quite some time as well. Wow. It's very odd, because as soon as you use the word career, it suggests some kind of foresight and planning, right?
Yeah.
As if there had been, and I'm certain the way you first contacted me, you've got some sort of like stages mapped out, at least a rough idea of where you see yourself going. I've always been, stepping through the world like in a Grimm Brothers fairy tale, stepping into the forest, tiptoeing my way forward, having no idea what adventure I was going to kind of end up in. Nothing was ever thought out. Really, it was just I met someone who would say you could do this, and I thought that was a laugh, and I'd do that. And the only thing that kind of forced me to go down a route is that when I began to learn the print trade. So as I said, bookbinding, letterpress, setting text and stuff, and I was learning that. And it wasn't an apprenticeship as such, but it was kind of like that. Just as the desktop publishing revolution came in, and suddenly people weren't getting stuff printed. And who goes and gets letterheads printed for a business now? It's just on a computer. You print, even if you print stuff out, it's just PDFs, isn't it? You don't even. In fact, even PDFs is old. It's whatever, you know. So I basically learned a trade that was dead overnight. You know.
Wow.
Like.
Yeah.
I mean, but even blacksmiths converted to doing car repairs. They didn't. they pivoted, to use your word there. I was like, okay, what the hell am I going to do? And then the YouTube channel, which I had kind of started because I wanted to do my own proper kind of going out there with a proper camera, doing documentaries and, you know, and adding in footage and stuff like that. And then I found out I hated the editing. Really hated the editing, and by the end of an edit I hated the subject so much I never wanted to go back to it again. And then COVID happened, and you know, housebound, couldn't go anywhere, and I just hit upon the idea of doing these live conversations with historians, mainly because it was easy. I didn't have to edit anything afterwards. It was do it live, press end stream, sit back, crack beer, have bag of crisps, you know, kind of thing. And then it found its sort of place, I suppose. And I guess I would pivot again if I felt the need, but I don't have any plans to. But then I've never had any plans for anything. I feel that I'm doing something that no one else is quite doing it in the same way. The live aspect, the having historians there, and the main successful history channels have the face is also the provider of the information, right? So, but I'm not. I'm the host. So I have a lot of stuff in my head, and I can have these conversations with the guest. But the guest is doing the new analysis of the battle, and they're saying this is what happened, and the second battalion moved in this way, and I'm just so that way I'm doing the easier role of bouncing the straight man to their comedian, if you like. So I'm doing that. But what gets me out of bed in the morning, after I need to go to the toilet, is that I have this. There are things I still want to see happen in World War II history. I still want the people to accept that it was an international event, to stop using the labels they use of this being an American battle, this being a British battle, accept the fact they were all international. We don't talk enough about the Sino-Japanese War. We don't talk enough about China's huge suffering in World War II. We still as a society have a tendency to use World War II not necessarily for the right reasons. I think Brexit connected to World War II in some ways. The Reform Party right now is using certain bits of World War II analogy that I have problems with. And yet some bits of World War II analogy I like. It's a complicated thing, but I keep wanting us to reevaluate. I never feel that I've learnt it all, and I'm never scared by the fact I don't know it all. I know some people who are terrified about the fact that they will never get to understand a subject, and I'm like, no, it's exciting. It's if you feel my eldest stepdaughter, she says, why do you only watch? I don't only watch old films. Why do you only watch old films? And I said, well, it's not an old film if you haven't seen it before, is it? And I said, I just find a lot of modern films, they don't get me going. You know, I saw Hamnet recently. I enjoyed that. But a 1950s thriller that I haven't seen before, with, you know, big hats and big shouldered jackets and women with impossible hairdos talking about a murder. You know, I can watch it an hour and 20 minutes. It's entertaining. I can see it's not too dark. With modern films are way too dark. I can hear the bloody dialogue, all that kind of stuff there. So it's not old if it's the first time I'm watching it. So World War II is not in the past if it's still relevant. And in our conversation today, and in the conversations I've had the last few days, there's these parallels all the time. There's these parallels. We don't have to highlight them all. If you're clever enough, you see all the parallels. You see the parallels of you said it yourself, when should the general public stand up and be counted? What time are you complicit in something by not standing against it? Or all those questions are as applicable in 2026 as they were in 1939, 1914. So all of that still intrigues me. And I'm when someone says, "Oh, I'm not interested in World War II," so you're like, okay, well, give me 5 minutes then, and I'll try and find a way of connecting with it. When I was touring all the time, and this sounds incredibly cliched and sexist, but there was that cliche of the dad was the World War II buff, right? The dad was the guy who'd grown up reading the comics. The dad had read the Stephen Ambrose books, and the wife and kids this was dad's day of the vacation. And the next day they were doing something else. They were going to do the galleries of Paris. And that was the wife's day. Now, I will say that there have been as many days I've had where the woman is interested in history personally, but that's the cliche is the bloke, right? And the tendency, therefore, is just focus on the bloke, focus on the guy, and just basically feed him stuff about tanks and aircraft all day. But I never did, because he's happy to be here. He doesn't need need looking after. I'm now focusing on the person who looks like they're the most the kid who is rolling their eyes, and the dad will say, how many hours have we got you for, Paul? I say, I'll be with you for 8 or 9 hours. And the kid does I will think, okay, no, because and if I've done it, you don't always get victories. But if a couple of hours later it's the kid asking me questions, then everybody's happy now, because the dad is now happy that the day he persuaded his family to do is now actually not being seen as quite as bad by them, because they're actually now engaging in it.
Yeah.
And you somehow found that approach to them by talking to the wife about, I don't know, you might say, does your husband have to go away for work a lot? Oh, my husband, or maybe she goes away for work a lot, right? Yeah, I'm often away for several weeks at a time. I said, well, imagine that for 4 years. Imagine your husband or your partner is away for 3 or 4 years, and you see them maybe twice a year, and letters, you've got no email, no text messages, a letter might come once every 3 weeks, and he's in peril every day.
Wow. Yeah.
How would you feel? What differences would you bring into your life with your kid? Would you tell your children how much danger your husband is in, their father is in? And then they suddenly start thinking, no, I don't know. Would I tell my kids their father was in danger? And when you start seeing them trying to respond to your question, you've got them then. And then you just realize that today is not the day to talk about. Of course, the 75mm gun was replaced a little bit later in the war by the 76mm gun, which had a much greater muzzle velocity. There are days that will work, but maybe not that day. And it's so pivoting it to the way you do it. So I've just got this insatiable thirst for looking at the past, and it sounds like a really kind of twee thing to say, because essentially understanding the past helps me understand me, because my granddad was away for 5 years and had a good relationship with his 2 daughters, my mum and my aunt. But I understand that their growing up was affected by the fact that their father was away. And maybe my mum who died last year was a bit clingy with me, because she knew that she'd had to go without her dad a bit during the war. So she wanted me to be at home a bit more, to appreciate being with my parents. And then, okay, I bet that was part of it. My dad, for example, who's still with us, loves chocolate, right? Can't eat as much as he used to because he's got type 2 diabetes now. But he couldn't gorge. I like chocolate. I don't eat as much now because I'm getting older. But back in the day, I could easily do a couple of double deckers and a Twix in a sitting. You know, a packet of chocolate digestives. You know, well, why do Pringles have a cap on the top? I can do a tube of Pringles. You know, but my dad could never eat lots of chocolate. And I go, why? But you love it. I said, I just can't. And I understood, because he never really communicated, or doesn't really communicate, that my granddad, who I never met, because my dad's dad died when my dad was 21, would come home from work on a Friday with a chocolate bar. This is post-war, but it's still rationing. Food rationing carried on until 1956, 57. So it's a Mars bar, but a little Mars, like not quite a fun-sized Mars bar, but a Mars bar. Maybe it'd be Mars bar one week, but next week it might be a Dairy Milk, and the week after it might be a Bounty, whatever, you know. And it would rotate every week as who got to cut the chocolate, right? So it'd be my dad's, it'd be my aunt's, it'd be and they would cut the chocolate into 4 bits, and whoever cut couldn't choose the first bit. Now, if you cut, someone else got the chocolate, because they'd never be that bit seems to have got a little bit more. It's got the little creep at the footprint of the Mars bar. It's got a little extra bit of chocolate. I'll have that bit, right? And you don't want a middle bit, because the middle bit you have less chocolate. So the point I'm making is that some days my dad would end up keeping his bit of Mars bar till the next Friday.
Wow.
So he could have 2 bits in one go. But then you get the point where the next Friday, so I've got 2 bits now. Maybe I could save it to have 3 weeks. And he would have it on his little shelf in his bedroom, hidden away from my aunt in case she nicked it halfway through the week. She was 2 years younger. But I'm realizing how important chocolate was to him, because it's how he measured his kind of life satisfaction that week. So when he got to be an adult and a parent, he had this attachment to chocolate as being a luxury. And I think my dad is annoyed at me because I could just sit in his house and just munch a double decker, you know. And he'd go, how could you do that? And so that understanding how he grew up was because of what he went through, because he was born on VJ Day, my dad. So his dad, my grandfather, who I never knew, had been a fire watcher and a reserved occupation, went down to factories and so that in West London. So understanding World War II helps me understand me, because I understand how my parents lived through it, which helps me understand why I am the way I am today, how I relate to my stepdaughters, who I love to bits, and how I relate to my partner and all that kind of stuff there. And that's what it is. History is as much of an insight into who you are as a human being as your music interests or your filming. It's another window as to why do I think the way, why do I have these views about my country? Why do I have these views about the past? Why do I have, the whole Churchill questions earlier on? I mean, one of the things, and I will stop talking eventually, is that I'm very grateful that when I see the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, Avro Lancaster fly, now occasionally will fly over Normandy. I've seen it a couple of times, but on the news going down Pall Mall, Royal Wedding or something like that, right? When I see that and I always turn the television up to, I've got surround sound speakers and I hear that roar. And I have 2 very primeval reactions to seeing that Lancaster. The 10-year-old boy in me just looks at it with awe and wonder. And I think about making up model Lancasters in my bedroom as a 10-year-old kid and go, look, just, whoa, it's almost physical. I can feel the excitement of what that represents. 4 Merlin engines and the color, and I can hear the soundtracks of the war films playing in my head, and I can see fluttering Union Jack flags, and Churchill's speeches is resonating as I see the Lancaster go past. Am I painting a picture for you? The other part of me is there is a weapon of war designed to wreak untold damage on a ground population. Yes, obviously lots of legitimate military targets, but military targets sit next to civilian targets. So if you're hitting a railway yards, you're hitting a railway station, which means you're hitting passengers or hitting trains. If you're hitting a factory in the middle of a city, you're also hitting the workers, maybe, who go to that factory there, who have wives and kids and stuff. And I'm so grateful I have those two conflicting thoughts. I don't want either one to replace. I don't want just one of them. If I just have that's a weapon of war, I can't do my job as a historian. I won't be excited about history if I don't have a little bit of an interest in the fact that these weapons of war are sort of childishly exciting to me. But I also don't want to remove the part of me that finds war abhorrent and disgusting. Because that would mean I just become one of those nerds who it's all just like a top trumps game. It's all like but my tank's bigger than your tank, and I don't want to become that either. I want to remain in this position where I'm tortured by some of the, I watched Nuremberg, last night, in fact. And, they play in the courtroom, the real scenes of the concentration camps. And I've seen that footage many times before. It still moves me to my core. I don't want to get to the point where I can just go, yeah, seen that now. It's not a commercial on TV for insurance that you just can switch your brain off. If you're not reacting with a twisted feeling of angst in your stomach when you see footage of the Holocaust, then you're no longer a human being, and therefore you're not fit to discuss World War II. So that's why I keep doing. I mean, if I pivot, as you say, it's because at its heart is this unashamed interest in understanding why human beings could do what they did to each other, and how can we learn from that? How can we analyze it? And even analyzing a battle on a pure kind of academic, why did they turn left at that hill, not right, is still flexing the gray muscles. It's still understanding how people make decisions, and that's relevant today. And that will therefore help us understand AI. If people can understand how a battle works, they can understand how AI works. Does that make sense? Hopefully.
Yes, 100%. That is a great way to end it. I think that's a great summary of why history and World War II, not just for you, but for everyone, is important to study. And I'm so glad there's people like you, Paul, who actually exist, who can share it in a nuanced way and not just do it in the top trumps way or the mechanical way, but also add things that we still need to look upon, like it being a multinational thing and being able to talk about issues like Holocaust denial and adding AI into it. Just your breadth of knowledge on this topic, a very important topic like you just discussed, is truly admirable, and it's why I love you coming on the show to discuss it with us. So thank you very much for coming on the show, Paul. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
And where can people go if they want to find out more of your stuff, more of your work, and maybe tell us a bit about the book you're going to be writing and are writing and going to be publishing?
Okay, thank you. So the main port of entry is the World War II TV YouTube page. That's where I announce anything there. I have got a D-Day historian website as well, and a World War II TV regular website, but it's the YouTube channel where I put most things out there. And the book, it's sort of in the middle of research right now, still writing down a few sample chapters. Got to give me the right headspace to work, and I've to work on that. And I've got so many other things going on, and got a TV job coming up next week, and things like that. So there's always things happening that cause me to have to pivot. I will take that word forward with it. But World War II TV, the YouTube channel, is the best way to find out what I'm up to date with there. And I'm always responding to comments, and I have a community page there that I try and post anything in there. But the book will be on the Battle of La Haye-du-Puits, which is a town at the foot of the Cotentin Peninsula in Normandy, which is sort of to the west of Carenton, way south of Cherbourg, which is pre-Operation Cobra. So it's the kind of the beginning of the end of the attritional phase and the beginning of the breakout phase. And I'm looking at the American 8th Corps, who suffered terrible losses taking these 5 hills around that town. And it's not really been done before. So it's quite exciting. It's about an hour and a bit's drive for me, so I can get down there and do my pacing up and down to the battlefields and working out where lines of sight were. And did the tanks come around this corner? Was it that corner? That's really exciting. I mean, I'm very grateful I can just nip in my car and go down the road and be in a battlefield and walk it. So that's why I'm writing about Normandy, because that's where I live. So that's how people can find out. So World War II TV is the place to go.
Awesome. I'll leave it in the show notes below. And yeah, there are many questions I've not been able to ask you, and I would be love to do another round with you and talk about the book when it's out as well, because yeah, like I said, your knowledge is never ending on this topic. So thanks so much, Paul.
Yeah, happy to do a part 3.